10 tits. 10 tits. Woo. Tips. Tips. Ants are getting me. Gracious. Got long-winded on that. Take 3. Delete all that before. Good morning. Today I want to give you some tips for beginning photographers. My name's Caleb. I'm a professional photographer based in North Carolina, and today I'd like to give you 10 tips to hopefully make your photography a little bit better, especially if you're a beginner. This is for more of those people that have a really nice camera that's sitting in their basement, battery's been dead for about 2 years, and they decide, you know what, I spent all that money on that camera about 10 years ago, time to get that thing out and learn. So, 10 tips just for you. Stay tuned. Tip number 1, turn your flash off. Every time you hit the button, the shutter button, that flash probably pops up and starts flashing in every photo. Turn that off. If you don't know how, look in your manual, figure out how to cut it off. Get that flash off. Let the camera expose for the natural light and not rely on that flash. Your photos will be much softer, much cleaner, and a little bit more consistent, especially if you're just shooting in auto mode. Tip number 2, when you're taking a photo, especially like your kids, family, whatever it is, you want to fill the frame up as much as possible with that thing. If it's a inanimate object, if it's a kid, if it's a person, if it's something you're selling on Marketplace or eBay, fill the frame up and make sure that it's all within frame but filled up. There's always a place for a wide shot, and if you're trying to capture the surroundings around someone, then that is important. But make sure if you're trying to isolate like a portrait or a photo of your kid or whatever, put as much of them in the frame as you can without cutting the top of their head off unless that's intentional, and make them the absolute subject of that photo. It will improve the compositions of your photos from there on out. Tip number 3, composition. Make sure that when you're taking photos that your composition is set up properly. In other words, make sure whatever your subject is either dead center with very little headspace or off to a side a third. It's called a rule of thirds, so you want to split your viewfinder up into 3 sections and make sure your subject is in one of those sections from top to bottom, left or right. So composition is important when it comes to that, and the more you practice that, the more that'll make sense and the more that'll kind of play into every kind of photo that you take, whether or not it's a wide landscape or wide portraiture, or if it's a up close product shot of something you're gonna put on eBay, or maybe of one of your kids opening Christmas presents. So composition, pay attention to that and pay attention to where your subject is in the screen. So tip number 4, whenever you're out at the beach taking photos, at a birthday party, taking photos of your kid or of somebody else's kid, you're trying to tell a story. You're trying to navigate a story for folks that are not there. So something that I try to do, and it's pretty important, is to take detail shots. Take lots of detail shots, up close, very intimate detail shots of things that are in the setting around you. So in other words, if you're at a birthday party, you're not just taking a bunch of pictures of kids. You're taking photos of the cake. You're taking photos of close-up crop, like real close-in crop photos of the cake, of little details on the cake. So you want a detail and then a detail of a detail. So you want to kind of close that gap and bring those photos kind of throughout the day. So in other words, you're taking photos of kids. You'll take a picture of a hat on top of one of the kids close up, a picture of the forks laid out on the table, a picture of the cupcakes up close, a picture of the cake up close. Little things like that help tell the story and help people feel like they were a part of it. So details, close-up details. Tip number 5, and this is a little bit more advanced, but watch for shadows. Whenever you're taking photos of somebody, say at the beach, at the park or whatever, pay attention to shadows across their face. If you are taking a photo of someone and that shadow splits them right across the face, 1, the sun might be in their eyes, they'll be squinting. 2, your photo probably won't be exposed correctly because it'll be, your camera won't exactly know what to do because you're probably not in manual mode yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. But watch for shadows. If all it takes is to turn someone a little bit one way or the other and get that shadow off their face, it's well worth the thought. And the more you practice that, the more that'll become second nature to kind of look for those type of things. Tip number 6. So first thing I would have a beginner do, especially if they're wanting to improve their photos, is to get out of auto. Take auto completely out of the equation. Switch to one of the priority modes instead. Learn your aperture priority, learn what shutter priority does. Try to learn that exposure triangle. So when you do get to the point of shooting manual, which I would recommend everybody do, you are more inclined to understand your exposure triangle and understand what each corner of the exposure triangle does to affect your photo. And that way, the more you practice that, the more you'll know, okay, well, I want to take a picture of this flower and I want it to be really shallow. So what do I need to set up on the camera to make sure I get that, versus trying to take a picture in auto and everything's in focus and it's exposed somewhat properly, but everything's in focus. It's not very artistic, and it's not the vision you had in your head. It's not that professional photo look that you are trying to achieve. All right, tip number 7. So a lot of people have the habit of going through their photos, especially while they're shooting, and deleting photos that they don't like right then and there. I would recommend against this, because if you ever get to the point where you are gonna try to make money with photography, that is a really good way to make your cards fail at some point. Deleting photos, and the more movement you have on those SD cards, can potentially create problems later on as far as file corruption and things like that. So what I would recommend instead is, if you have the memory card space available, shoot all the photos you're gonna shoot. Once you upload them, cull through them at that point, and then go back, put the card in your camera, or if you keep your card in your camera, you just plug your camera in your computer, then unplug your camera and format the card again. So before every time you have a new session or a new shooting of different photos, format that card and make sure that it's completely formatted and clean. Just make sure that you have any photos that you want saved, because once you format it, they're gone. Same with deletion. Once you delete them, they're gone. That's why I would rather review them on a computer versus review them on this little screen and make a decision of whether or not I want to keep the photo. Because there's been times that I've had photos that I was like, man, I just completely botched that photo, and I get it back in the computer and it's either salvageable or is a better photo than I realized once I saw it on a full-size screen. So don't delete photos. Format your card when you're ready to shoot a new session. Tip number 8, don't over edit your photos. The number one thing I see when people first start out, especially in actually trying to progress photography, is over editing their photos. So what I would recommend is set up your picture profile on your camera to where it is a pleasing look as far as however you want to set your style to, and shoot JPEG and leave it alone. Go out and learn how to take good photos that are correct in camera. Stay away from editing as much as possible. Once you get a little bit more down the road, start shooting raw and learn how to actually process a photo. It's more of a process than what I would call editing, because you're taking a completely raw file at that point and then setting the colors and adjustment yourself. I would, like I said, shoot JPEG, set your camera up, and learn how to get it right in camera to begin with. The thing is recording, isn't it? Tip number, God dang it, man. Freaking fire ants. Tip number, lost count. Tip number 9. There's nothing worse than going to the beach, taking a freaking awesome picture of your kid and noticing the big old dude in the background that's picking his nose, or has got his hands in the back of his shorts, scratching his butt or something like that. And while that stuff is fixable, it's not worth the time to go in there and edit family photos like that. You want to be able to put them on Facebook or Instagram or whatever as quick as you can. You don't have to go through and mess with nothing like that. So pay attention to what's in the viewfinder. Make sure you know what's around you or around your subject. Start from the corners and work your way in, whether you're looking at the back of the camera or through a viewfinder. Start from the edges, work your way in, and make sure everything in that scene is where you want it, because it's super easy just to shift one way or the other to get a new composition and maybe get some kind of obstacle in the background out of the way. That way you don't have to mess with it in Photoshop later. All right, my last tip number 10. So the biggest thing that I see people do is they get a camera and they want to learn how to use it. They want to understand what all the buttons do. They want to understand all the menu options and how to take those really cool, thin depth of field, professional looking photos, but they don't ever spend any time with the camera. They expect someone to show them how to use their camera and then them be able to go out and do it at the beach or the park or whatever. That's not how it works. This is a perishable skill, in my opinion. It's one of those things that if you don't get out and practice and learn that camera, you're never gonna get better with it. If you have the memory cards to do it, if you've got a battery charger for your camera, go out and shoot. Go out, spend an hour a day messing with trying to take pictures of inanimate objects and make them look pleasing. That's what I did when I first started. Was I would take things that nobody wants to see a picture of, and I would try to take a very pleasing photo of it. That way it looked like it was taken by a professional photographer. So in other words, I would go out and I would take pictures of screwdrivers or a hammer or the labels on different boxes to try to get different depths of field with them and things like that. So spend time with it and actually shooting your camera. You don't have to save any of these photos. It's just a matter of going through and clicking the shutter. So make sure you go out and shoot. Take photos of ridiculous things and try your best to make them look like something special. So that was my 10 tips for beginning photographers. I hope that helps somebody. There's a lot to this whole hobby or profession or however you want to say it, but all it comes down to is trying to learn to do better than the time you did before. So in other words, get out and shoot. Take some photos. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them for me. I'd do my best to answer them. If I don't have an answer for you, I'll be glad to find one or point you in the right direction. So I hope you got something from this video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button. Leave me a comment. Hit the like thing. Always leave a like. That's great. That helps the algorithm gods see me since I'm such a small channel. So with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll hopefully see you again in a week. That'll work. Beedaloo. Check, check, checky check.